Imagine this for a moment. Every second, trillions of cells in your body are listening. Listening for signals. Listening for balance. And when blood sugar rises, it isn't just a number changing on a screen, it's a conversation inside the body that has grown confused. Diabetes is not merely about sugar, it is about communication breaking down. And sometimes, the most powerful way to restore that conversation is not through force, but through nourishment, small molecular messengers we call vitamins. Vitamin D enters the conversation quietly, almost humbly, yet its influence reaches deep into the architecture of blood sugar control. Often spoken of as a vitamin, it behaves more like a messenger hormone, slipping into the bloodstream and binding to receptors that exist in places we once never expected, including the pancreas, muscle tissue, and fat cells. These are the very spaces where insulin tries to do its work. When vitamin D is present in sufficient amounts, insulin's signal becomes clearer, stronger, more persuasive, allowing glucose to move out of the blood and into the cells where it can be used as energy rather than stored as damage. In people living with diabetes, insulin resistance is often described as stubbornness, as if the body is refusing to cooperate. But biology is rarely rebellious without reason. Vitamin D deficiency subtly changes the environment around the insulin receptor, making it harder for insulin to bind and harder for the cell to respond. Research observations consistently show that low vitamin D levels are associated with poorer glucose tolerance and higher fasting blood sugar. This does not mean vitamin D replaces insulin, but it helps insulin be understood, like improving the clarity of a language the body has begun to forget. The pancreas itself listens to vitamin D. Beta cells, which produce insulin, contain vitamin D receptors and the enzymes needed to activate it. When vitamin D is lacking, insulin secretion becomes less efficient, not because the pancreas is broken, but because its internal signaling is dimmed. Adequate vitamin D appears to support these cells, helping them respond appropriately when blood glucose rises. This relationship reveals a deeper truth about the body. Blood sugar regulation is not a single switch, but a network of subtle adjustments responding to light, nutrients, and time. Muscle tissue plays an equally important role in this story. After meals, muscles are one of the largest consumers of glucose. Vitamin D supports muscle function and strength, but also improves how muscle cells respond to insulin. With sufficient vitamin D, glucose transporters are more effectively activated, allowing sugar to enter the cell instead of circulating endlessly in the bloodstream. This process does not feel dramatic or immediate, but over weeks and months, it changes the baseline, gently lowering insulin resistance and easing metabolic strain. There is also an inflammatory dimension that cannot be ignored. Chronic low-grade inflammation is a common companion of diabetes, quietly interfering with insulin signaling. Vitamin D has immunomodulatory properties that help calm excessive inflammatory responses. By reducing inflammatory markers, vitamin D indirectly improves insulin sensitivity, creating a more cooperative internal environment. In this way, it acts less like a drug and more like a mediator, restoring peace rather than enforcing control. Sunlight becomes part of this biological reflection. For most of human history, vitamin D was synthesized daily through skin exposure to the sun. Modern indoor living, protective clothing, and limited outdoor time have disrupted this ancient rhythm. The body still expects light-based signals, yet often receives darkness instead. Diabetes, in this sense, can be seen as partially disconnected from natural cycles, where the absence of sunlight translates into hormonal confusion at the cellular level. What makes vitamin D especially compelling is that its influence unfolds slowly. It does not spike blood sugar down in hours, nor does it override medication. Instead, it reshapes responsiveness over time. Blood sugar improves not through force, but through improved communication. Cells begin to listen again. Insulin becomes less strained. The metabolic system shifts from resistance toward cooperation. This understanding invites a gentler way of thinking about diabetes management. Rather than viewing the body as malfunctioning, vitamin D encourages us to see it as underinformed. When a key signal is missing, confusion follows. Restoring that signal does not guarantee perfection, but it allows physiology to function closer to its intended design, where glucose moves with purpose and balance is maintained not through struggle, but through alignment with the body's deeper biological intelligence. Vitamin B12 operates in the background of blood sugar regulation, far from the spotlight of glucose readings, yet deeply embedded in the systems that determine how those numbers rise and fall. It is a vitamin of continuity, supporting the body's ability to convert fuel into energy and signals into action. When vitamin B12 is sufficient, glucose is not merely present in the bloodstream but is guided efficiently into the pathways where it can be transformed and used. When it is lacking, that guidance weakens, and blood sugar begins to linger, not from excess intake, but from incomplete utilization. At the cellular level, vitamin B12 is essential for the integrity of energy metabolism. Cells rely on it to complete critical steps in the biochemical cycles that turn glucose into usable energy. Without enough B12, these cycles slow down, and energy production becomes inefficient. Glucose may enter the cell, yet remain only partially processed, creating a state where blood sugar stays elevated while the body simultaneously feels fatigued. This paradox is common in diabetes, where high glucose coexists with low energy, revealing that the issue is not always abundance, but inefficiency. The nervous system adds a powerful layer to this relationship. Blood sugar regulation depends on constant communication between the brain, pancreas, liver, and muscles. Vitamin B12 maintains the health of this communication network by preserving the myelin sheath that protects nerve fibers. When myelin is intact, signals travel smoothly and accurately. When B12 is deficient, signals weaken, slow, or distort, and the body loses precision in how it regulates glucose. Insulin release may be delayed, muscle response may be blunted, and glucose balance becomes less coordinated. This disruption is especially significant in diabetes, where nerve health is already vulnerable. Subtle nerve impairment can interfere with hunger cues, energy regulation, and glucose awareness. Vitamin B12 supports nerve resilience, helping preserve the feedback loops that allow the body to sense rising blood sugar and respond appropriately. In this way, B12 does not directly lower glucose, but it strengthens the systems that allow regulation to happen naturally. Muscle tissue plays a central role in this process. As one of the largest glucose consumers in the body, muscle depends on both insulin sensitivity and clear nerve signaling. Vitamin B12 supports both. When nerves communicate efficiently, muscles respond more accurately to insulin's message, absorbing glucose and converting it into energy. This reduces the load on the bloodstream and lowers the demand placed on insulin production, easing metabolic strain over time. The liver, too, relies on vitamin B12 for balanced glucose management. Responsible for storing glucose after meals and releasing it during fasting, the liver must act with precision. Vitamin B12 supports enzymatic reactions involved in these storage and release processes. In deficiency states, the liver may release glucose unnecessarily, contributing to elevated fasting blood sugar even when dietary intake has not changed. Restoring B12 helps re-establish timing and restraint in these processes. Vitamin B12 deficiency often develops gradually and silently, particularly in people with diabetes who use medications that interfere with its absorption. Symptoms such as numbness, tingling, weakness, or mental fog may appear slowly, often dismissed as aging or disease progression. Meanwhile, metabolic efficiency continues to decline, making blood sugar control more difficult despite consistent habits. This highlights how glucose imbalance can reflect weakened internal infrastructure rather than lack of effort. When vitamin B12 levels are restored, the effect is not immediate or dramatic, but structural. Energy pathways regain efficiency. Nerve signals become clearer. Muscles respond more readily. The body begins to use glucose with less friction and less resistance. Blood sugar improves as coordination improves, revealing that stability often returns not through force, but through rebuilding the quiet systems that allow metabolism to function with clarity and balance. Vitamin B12 works beneath the surface of blood sugar numbers, in places where metabolism meets memory, where energy meets sensation, and where the nervous system quietly choreographs how the body responds to glucose. Unlike nutrients that act quickly in the bloodstream, vitamin B12 operates deep inside cells, supporting the machinery that converts glucose into usable energy. When this process falters, sugar may still enter the cell, but it is not efficiently transformed, leaving the body fatigued and the blood glucose burdened with excess that was never properly welcomed inside. In diabetes, this inefficiency is often mistaken for a simple problem of insulin alone, yet vitamin B12 reveals a more layered reality. Glucose metabolism depends on healthy mitochondria, the tiny power centers within cells that rely on vitamin B12 to function optimally. Without sufficient B12, mitochondria struggle to complete energy cycles, causing glucose to be underutilized. The result is a subtle metabolic traffic jam, where sugar remains in circulation not because the body refuses it, but because the engines meant to burn it are running at reduced capacity. The nervous system adds another dimension to this story. Nerves play a critical role in glucose regulation by coordinating signals between the brain, pancreas, liver, and muscles. Vitamin B12 is essential for maintaining the protective myelin sheath around nerves, allowing electrical signals to travel smoothly and accurately. In diabetes, nerve damage can distort these signals, weakening the body's ability to regulate blood sugar effectively. When vitamin B12 levels are adequate, nerve communication remains intact, preserving the clarity of messages that help the body anticipate, respond to, and correct fluctuations in glucose. This becomes especially relevant for individuals who rely on certain diabetes medications that are known to reduce vitamin B12 absorption over time. The deficiency often develops silently, masked by gradual fatigue, numbness, or subtle cognitive fog. As B12 levels decline, energy production weakens, nerve signaling slows, and glucose regulation becomes increasingly inefficient. Blood sugar may rise not because of dietary changes, but because the internal infrastructure supporting metabolic balance has quietly eroded. There is a deeper elegance in how vitamin B12 influences insulin sensitivity indirectly. Healthy nerves improve muscle responsiveness, and responsive muscles are among the largest consumers of glucose in the body. When nerve signals reach muscle tissue efficiently, insulin-driven glucose uptake becomes smoother and more coordinated. Vitamin B12 does not force muscles to absorb glucose. It ensures that the instructions arrive clearly, on time, and without distortion. The liver also depends on vitamin B12 for proper glucose handling. As the organ responsible for storing and releasing glucose, the liver must precisely balance supply and demand. Vitamin B12 supports enzymatic reactions involved in glycogen metabolism, helping the liver store glucose after meals and release it appropriately between them. In deficiency states, this balance tilts, and glucose may be released unnecessarily, contributing to elevated fasting blood sugar levels even in the absence of food. What makes vitamin B12 particularly fascinating is its relationship with time. Deficiency does not announce itself suddenly. It unfolds slowly, shaping metabolic outcomes over years rather than days. Blood sugar control gradually becomes more difficult, energy declines, and nerve sensitivity fades, often attributed to aging or disease progression rather than a missing micronutrient. Yet when vitamin B12 is restored, the body often responds with renewed efficiency, as if remembering a function it had nearly forgotten. This perspective reframes diabetes care away from constant correction and toward maintenance of internal systems that allow balance to emerge naturally. Vitamin B12 does not lower blood sugar by direct intervention. It strengthens the pathways through which glucose is sensed, used, and distributed. It reminds us that metabolic health depends not only on hormones and carbohydrates, but on the quiet integrity of the body's electrical and energetic networks, where nourishment supports communication, and communication sustains balance. Together, these vitamins reveal a truth that modern health conversations often rush past, that the body does not respond best to pressure, but to support. Blood sugar regulation is frequently framed as a battle, numbers to be pushed down, cravings to be suppressed, systems to be overridden. Yet at a biological level, glucose balance emerges from cooperation among cells, hormones, nerves, and enzymes. When key vitamins are missing, this cooperation weakens, not because the body is failing, but because it lacks the signals required to work in synchrony. Vitamins do not act like switches that force blood sugar lower. They act like facilitators, restoring the conditions under which balance can naturally occur. Vitamin D helps insulin be heard, vitamin B12 keeps energy and nerve pathways intact, and vitamin B6 supports metabolic reactions and stress chemistry. None of these demand obedience from the body. Instead, they create clarity. Insulin speaks, cells listen. Glucose arrives, tissues receive it. The bloodstream becomes a passageway rather than a holding space. Scientific observation increasingly supports this idea of metabolic cooperation. Deficiency states are associated with resistance, inflammation, and inefficiency. Sufficiency, by contrast, is associated with responsiveness. This does not mean perfection, and it does not promise cure, but it shifts the internal environment from tension to readiness. When vitamins are adequate, cells are not constantly defending themselves against stress signals. They are more willing to respond, more capable of adapting, and less likely to resist insulin's message. This cooperative model helps explain why aggressive control sometimes backfires. When the body feels under threat, whether from chronic stress, nutrient deficiency, or repeated glucose spikes, it adapts by holding on to energy. Blood sugar rises not out of excess, but out of caution. Vitamins soften this defensive posture. They reassure the body that resources are available, that energy pathways are supported, that communication is intact. In that reassurance, resistance begins to ease. There is also a quiet psychological resonance here. When care focuses only on restriction, the individual often feels blamed by their own biology. But when care includes nourishment, the relationship with the body changes. Vitamins become symbols of restoration rather than correction. This shift matters, because stress hormones directly influence blood sugar. A calmer internal environment, both biologically and emotionally, supports better glucose regulation without conscious effort. At the cellular level, cooperation means timing and accuracy. Insulin must arrive when glucose is present. Receptors must respond without delay. Enzymes must complete reactions without interruption. Vitamins support each of these steps, not by dominating the process, but by stabilizing it. This stability reduces metabolic noise, allowing the system to self-correct more effectively after meals, during rest, and across daily rhythms. The idea of harmony also extends to inflammation. Chronic inflammation disrupts insulin signaling, making cells less responsive. Vitamins such as D and B6 help modulate immune responses, reducing unnecessary inflammatory signals that interfere with glucose metabolism. As inflammation quiets, insulin sensitivity improves. The body no longer has to choose between defense and balance. It can do both. Over time, this cooperative approach reshapes baseline blood sugar patterns. Fasting glucose stabilizes. Post-meal spikes soften. Energy becomes more consistent. These changes often feel subtle, but their cumulative effect is profound. The body moves from constant compensation to quiet efficiency. It spends less energy correcting imbalance and more energy maintaining equilibrium. What emerges from this understanding is a more compassionate science of diabetes care. One that recognizes that the body is not an enemy to be controlled, but a system seeking the resources it needs to function well. Vitamins, in this light, are not shortcuts or miracle tools. They are foundational supports that allow the body's innate intelligence to express itself more fully. This perspective does not reject medication, diet, or movement. It deepens them. When vitamins restore cooperation, other interventions work more effectively. Food is processed with less strain. Exercise improves insulin sensitivity more reliably. Medications achieve their purpose with fewer obstacles. Balance becomes a shared effort rather than a forced outcome. In the end, blood sugar harmony is not created by domination, but by alignment. When cells feel supported, they respond. When signals are clear, they are followed. When the body senses sufficiency instead of scarcity, it releases its grip on excess glucose. This is the quiet power of cooperation, where healing unfolds not through pressure, but through restoring the conditions that allow the body to remember how balance feels. What emerges from this understanding is a shift in how diabetes itself is perceived, not as a condition defined solely by control and limitation, but as an ongoing conversation between the body and its environment. For many people, the daily experience of diabetes is shaped by numbers, restrictions, and constant vigilance. Yet beneath these surface efforts lies a deeper biological story, one that asks not only how to reduce blood sugar, but why the body has come to hold onto it in the first place. Key vitamins invite us into this quieter inquiry, where restoration often matters as much as regulation. Vitamins do not arrive with urgency or force. They integrate slowly, working within existing systems rather than overpowering them. This gradual influence mirrors the way imbalance often develops in diabetes, over years of subtle stress, nutrient depletion, and disrupted rhythms. When essential vitamins are restored, the body does not immediately reverse course, but it begins to soften its defenses. Insulin resistance eases not because the body is compelled to respond, but because it feels better equipped to do so. There is something profoundly human in this process. Many individuals with diabetes carry an unspoken sense of failure, believing their bodies are broken or uncooperative. A nutrient-centered perspective reframes this belief. It suggests that the body has been adapting to scarcity rather than refusing to comply. Vitamins restore a sense of internal abundance, signaling that energy production, nerve communication, and metabolic balance are supported. In that signal, the body finds permission to relax its grip on excess glucose. This approach also acknowledges that healing is rarely linear. Blood sugar does not respond like a switch, and neither do vitamins. Their role is foundational, not corrective. They support the structures that allow other interventions to succeed. When cells are nourished, they respond more predictably to insulin. When nerves are healthy, glucose regulation becomes more coordinated. When stress chemistry is stabilized, blood sugar fluctuations become less extreme. These changes accumulate quietly, reshaping the metabolic landscape over time. Scientific insight increasingly aligns with this philosophy. Studies repeatedly associate micronutrient sufficiency with improved metabolic outcomes, not because vitamins act as treatments, but because deficiency creates resistance at multiple levels. In this light, improvement comes from removing barriers rather than adding pressure. The body does not need to be forced into balance, it needs the tools to achieve it. This understanding also encourages patience, both clinical and personal. Nutrient restoration teaches us to work with the body's timing rather than against it. Progress may appear slow, but it is often more durable. Instead of chasing immediate reductions, this approach builds resilience, making blood sugar stability easier to maintain over months and years. At its core, this perspective invites compassion. Not only for those living with diabetes, but for the body itself. It recognizes that physiology responds to care more reliably than to punishment. Vitamins become symbols of this care, small but essential acts of support that allow biological intelligence to reassert itself. In this way, diabetes management becomes less about constant correction and more about relationship. A relationship grounded in listening, nourishment, and respect for the body's complexity. Vitamins do not promise cures, but they offer something equally valuable, a pathway back toward cooperation, where balance emerges not from struggle, but from restoring what the body has been missing all along.